All right, today we are talking about section 7.3. In this section we are going to introduce functions. Now, to understand how functions work, let's take a look at two examples here. The first one is talking about how much you make on a quiz depends on how many questions you answered correctly. So of course, if you had a 20 question quiz and you answered 10 questions correctly, then that would give you how much you made on that quiz. The other scenario we have here is talking about how far you travel at a constant speed depends on how long you have been traveling. Now, looking at these two scenarios, we can try and represent them in terms of ordered pairs. Let's go ahead and see how we can do that. Let's look at our first scenario here, the quiz and the questions answered correctly. Let's say we look at this ordered pair 10, 20. Now here your first number will represent the questions answered correctly. And the 20, the second number, will represent the grade you made on the quiz. So that tells you each question was worth 2 points, and 10 questions answered correctly gives you 20 points on the quiz. Our second scenario was how far you travel at a constant speed will depend on how long you have been traveling. If we wanted to represent this in terms of an ordered pair, we could write this as, let's say, 60 and 75, where this tells you that this is the time traveled and this will give you the distance. So basically this tells you in 60 minutes you have traveled 75 miles. Now the idea is, in your quiz score right here, it depends on how many questions you answered correctly. And in the distance example, the distance traveled will depend on the time that you have been traveling. So we can, from this, conclude that the score on your quiz will depend on how many questions you answer correctly, and we can say that the score, or for that matter, the distance traveled. So your score or distance, we can call them as a dependent variable because they depend on time or the questions answered correctly. And of course your other variable would be the questions answered correctly and the time traveled. Will be called your independent variable because they don't depend on any other value. So you can see that, let's look at our first example again here real quick. You have your questions answered correctly and you have the grade on the quiz. We're saying that your grade on the quiz depends on how many questions you answer correctly. So this is your dependent variable and this is your independent variable. If you look at our second example here, we had the distance traveled will depend on how long you have been traveling, your time. So this is your dependent variable and this here will be your independent variable. So that gives us, in general, we can say that if I write my ordered pair in terms of x and y, this tells me that my x variable will be my independent variable, and that will of course make my y the dependent variable. So basically your value of y depends on value of x.